Let's go to the States now because the US Supreme Court has upheld a federal ban preventing anyone placed under a domestic violence restraining order from possessing a gun. US Attorney General Merrick Garland welcomed the ruling, saying that common sense prohibition is entirely consistent with the Second Amendment, which, as you know, is about the right to bear arms. Now, this comes after the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that the ban on gun possession for those under domestic violence restraining orders was unconstitutional. Let's talk to Kelly Rocksam, Director of Law and Policy at the Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Violence Solutions. Kelly, okay, so what do you think? The US Supreme Court has upheld a federal ban and did not side with the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. Are you joyful? Are you surprised? Are you sanguine? What do you think?
Frankly, I'm very relieved.
Mm,
A contrary decision would have been incredibly dangerous, not just to intimate partners in abusive situations, but also their children, their family, their friends, and everyone in the broader community. And so I think that we're all breathing a sigh of relief.
What kind of arguments were advanced in order to win this case at the Supreme Court, which is tilted 6-3 in the conservative direction?
So the argument advanced is that the Fifth Circuit was unduly restrictive in examining these historical analogies, essentially saying they were finding these small but not important dissimilarities between the federal law at issue and historical laws at the time of the founding. And the Supreme Court agreed with that, saying that we're not looking at each individual historical law and picking it apart. We're looking at the historical laws in totality to evince these higher general principles, the animating purpose behind them.
Right. And I see that in this case, this law, the federal law, was challenged by a Texas man who was subject to a restraining order. He'd assaulted his girlfriend in a parking lot and later threatened to shoot her. The fact that he would even advance an argument, given what he had threatened to do and that he was an abuser, is extraordinary. But it just goes to show just how baked in this notion of a right to bear arms is among people, even with homicidal intent.
Yeah, well, it's the logical outgrowth of the Supreme Court's decision 2 years ago in Bruin, where they're saying you need to find this historical tradition. And, a lot of litigants are looking at that and saying, we viewed domestic violence a lot differently in the 18th century. You don't find specific historical laws disarming domestic abusers. And that's for a number of different reasons. One, women had an incredibly different, role in society at that time. Also, intimate partner homicides with firearms are incredibly rare. So it's not surprising that you don't find legislation on it at the time. And so if what we were really looking for and what the Fifth Circuit was looking for are those strictly and very distinctly similar laws, you're just not going to find them.
Mhm. Unsurprisingly, Kelly, only Justice Clarence Thomas, the notorious Clarence Thomas, dissented. Did he give his reasons? What did he say?
Well, so his reasons are incredibly similar to the Fifth Circuit. I mean, he's saying that we need to look at each individual particular historical law and that it needs to be very similar to the modern laws at issue. I mean, essentially trapping us in amber, as Chief Justice John Roberts says we should not be.
Like the proverbial historical fly in the amber from Jurassic Park. Extraordinary, Kelly. So, as red flags go, what does this enable you and those who feel like you to do next?
So, what I think it really helps with is the Supreme Court is essentially cautioning lower courts not to engage in that same kind of strict historical analogy that the Fifth Circuit did as they're evaluating other gun violence prevention policies. They're saying we're not looking for identical laws or dead ringers. We're looking for these broader general principles. And I think if that's what we're looking for, we're definitely going to find higher general principles to uphold other types of gun violence prevention policies that really save lives.
Mhm. And there was another Supreme Court ruling just a week ago on rapid fire rifle bump stocks. And not everybody will be aware of this. Can you explain why that was significant?
So it's significant because its immediate impact is that the federal prohibition on bump stocks is no longer in effect.
Actually, can you explain what a bump stock is? Because not everybody will know.
Yeah, sure thing. So a bump stock is an accessory for a firearm that essentially harnesses the recoil energy so that I don't have to continue to pull the trigger for each individual shot. I can continuously put forward pressure on the bump stock from my shoulder, and it will essentially fire like an automatic rifle.
Right. And this is the kind of mechanism that was used at a Las Vegas concert by a gunman who was firing at people from a hotel room, wasn't he?
Yes, I mean, these kinds of accessories make these kinds of shooting, these mass shooting events incredibly lethal.
And can you tell me, Kelly, what's your morale, those of you who want common sense gun laws, when you see that the center of gravity feels like it's, well, it ebbs and flows, doesn't it? But even though the majority of Americans say we want common sense gun laws, we want red flags, people with mental health problems or domestic violence, when it comes to Washington, when it comes to the GOP, the grand old party, they won't hear of it.
It's incredibly disheartening that so many politicians don't seem to think that this is an urgent matter requiring legislative, fixes. And that's essentially what we need after Cargill versus Garland, where, the Supreme Court said it was an excess of the authority of the, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives to interpret this rule to include bump stocks. So now it's up to state legislatures and Congress to step into the gap.
Yeah.
And, you know,
And Kelly, one more thing. You know, former President Trump once said, hey, you're going to be safe with your gun ownership with me. Over in the UK, there's, I think it's something like that, there's a hospital somewhere in the middle where they don't have guns, but they have knives, 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 knives. Basically saying, look, it's not guns that kill people, it's people who kill people. Just as in the UK, they don't have guns, but they have knives, and people use knives to kill people. A lot of Americans still feel that way, don't they?
yeah, I mean, I think they certainly do. There's really a sentimental and cultural attachment to guns. And, the really logical response to that is, of course, people kill people, but they kill a lot more people with access to guns.
Yeah. Okay, Kelly Rocksam, Director of Law and Policy at the John Hopkins Centre for Gun Violence Solutions. Pleasure talking to you this evening on Times Radio.